Thank you for coming. It's such a beautiful day, and you're inside. My name's Ramona Naddaff, and I'm the director of the Art of Writing program, and I'm faculty in the Rhetoric Department. And Art of Writing is actually in its 10th year, if you can believe it, and has of today created over 70 advanced nonfiction writing classes in arts and humanities, social sciences, STEM, data science, and journalism. Art of Writing, I hope, continues to transform Berkeley's writing landscape, upholding its tradition of freedom of expression and interdisciplinary scholarship. I think you're going to see some living examples of that today with our students. Our guest lecturer today is Jaron Lanier. Since our audience is so large and our time limited, I will be as brief as possible, and I'm permitting myself the use of ChatGPT since this is a lecture on.
You're not actually using it.
No, what do you mean?
What?
What do you mean?
Did you say you're actually going to use it?
I went on.
Okay, I mean, I get a penny every time you use it.
Oh, good. Well, I didn't know, but once I got it.
Joke's on you.
Once I got it. No, all right. Let me just tell you.
Sorry, I'm disrupting. I think we didn't.
Well, that's why we invited you, Jaron, to disrupt. Anyway, I did do it. Then I had second thoughts because I didn't want my students to see me doing it. And now I should have had third thoughts because you're getting richer on it. But I'm going to quote from the now absent text. And Jaron, you'll be very happy to hear it. It's very flattering.
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah. I keep that thing alive.
Okay. Jaron Lanier is a fascinating figure in the tech world. He's an American computer scientist, composer, visual artist, and author. Often referred to as a pioneer of virtual reality. Lanier co-founded VPL Research, the first company to sell VR Google goggles and wired gloves. And beyond his technological contributions, he's also known for his thought-provoking books like You Are Not a Gadget and 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. And then it goes on to say, he works in music composition and philosophy, and then they call you a Renaissance man. And it says, if you're curious.
I should point out that the actual Renaissance men were also athletes.
Oh, well.
And so I don't think I qualify, but, but ChatGPT is not reliable, and this is an example.
That's what I was going to ask you. That's what I was going to ask you, that you would, in fact, correct it if it was wrong. And then it said to me, what aspect of his work interests you most? Which aspect of your work interests you most?
You're asking me? Ridiculing AI, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure.
Anyway, the New Yorker, in which Jaron publishes, adds this little bit. He is presently prime unifying scientist at Microsoft, but does not speak for the company. And we've been trying to figure out what prime unifying scientist is and didn't really understand.
It's a pun. So a long time ago, I did work studying cephalopod neurology, which is the octopuses and the squid, because they're totally fascinating. And I also have come to look like one a little bit. And so in Microsoft, there's the chief technology officer, and there's an office of a chief technology officer. So being the prime unifying scientist makes me Microsoft's octopus. And that is what it means.
Oh, thank you. See, ChatGPT, do you think ChatGPT could have answered that?
I have no idea. If it's out there in the training data, yes, and if not, no. And I have absolutely no idea if it would be.
Okay, moving on. No introduction would be complete without thanking all the many people who have helped to produce this event. First, Margaret and Matt Jacobson, who made the Michael Rogan Annual Art of Writing possible with their generosity. Director Stephen Best and the Townsend Center have, as always, been essential in contributing their labor and love to these events. And the Art of Writing team, Rebecca Egger, Jane Liao, and our student interns are the life of this program, with whom the program would simply cease to exist, without whom. Margaret Kolb, who teaches Art of Writing's course, Writing Robots, worked with the students and me to carefully craft the questions you are about to hear. And finally, I thank the students who will be in conversation with Jaron Lanier. I thank you simply for being the distinct, original, and careful, not to mention very critical, thinkers, writers, readers, and speakers that you are. And thank you, Jaron. So, what? Oh, Jaron wants to add one little bit to this.
Oh, should we sit down or what?
Well, you can sit down or you can stand.
Doing. I don't know the protocol.
Well, you wanted to talk about your.
Oh, I was going to say, you might have noticed that something changed recently for me because I started wearing all this jewelry, probably too much beyond the limits of good taste. And I wanted to explain why that happens. At the start of the year, I received a diagnosis that I was about to go blind. And I decided I really wanted something beautiful to look at immediately all the time because I didn't know if I'd still have my vision. Then another doctor looked at me and said, "Oh, you saw a terrible doctor. That person knows nothing. You're fine." Then I saw a third one and they said, "Both of the two people you saw were terrible, but you're fine." So I have 2 against 1. I think I'm fine, but I just really got to like this stuff. So somehow it's comforting during this crazy time when it feels like the world is falling apart to just have a little bit of extra world right on you that, so that's what's going on. I thought you might be curious. And then I wasn't going to wear this much jewelry to this talk, but on my way here, I got stopped at a jewelry store on Telegram. And so it got bad, and here we are. So now you know. All right.
Thanks for telling us about that.
Yeah.
I kind of like that idea of wearing as much jewelry as possible.
Until the guy's out of office. Then we can all be normal again.
Okay.
Just for a little while.
Oh, damn.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to start with, today is about artificial intelligence and critical thinking, and we're going to start with music. Three students are going to talk to you about their questions and their comments, and after reading your article in the New Yorker on music.
Okay.
Okay?
Cool.
So everybody read, believe it or not. They read your work.
Did you really read it, or like a summary or something? You read it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Cool. I love reading. I'm glad you do.
Okay.
Cool.
Here we go.
Hello.
Hello.
My question was inspired by Professor Naddaff's aesthetics and music class this semester, where we've been reading the work of 19th century German philosopher Schopenhauer. He argued that music is expression and representation, which reminded me of your hope for virtual reality as post-symbolic communication. As a musician yourself, I was wondering if you could talk about whether you see any connection between the two mediums of music and virtual reality.
Oh, yes. All right. So I was asked to keep my answers very short. And then you have to ask a question like that. So this
It's going to be worse.
it presents me with a really impossible dilemma, right?
Well, wait to hear the next question, and then you can talk more.
So I'm gonna listen to all of them first before I talk. Okay.
Do you
all
want
right.
a pen or?
Go.
Okay. So this is Renata, this is Stella, and this is Mary. They're supposed to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Stella, and we read your New Yorker article, What My Musical Instruments Have Taught Me, and in it, you express a love for making music, especially with obscure instruments. You also noted that you don't feel electronic equivalents to these physical instruments are quite as emotionally resonant. I'd be curious to hear about your experience listening to music as someone who is not only knowledgeable about the technological platforms dominating our relationship to media, but as a musician. Streaming service algorithms have become increasingly sophisticated, including AI DJ playlists. Do you think these algorithms and pre-made playlists, which do not actively involve the listener, impose a fixed taste with the biases of the algorithm on listeners? And does the integration of algorithms in curating a listening experience lessen the potential of emotional resonance? If so, how?
Okay.
Hello.
So, like Stella's question, additionally, in your New Yorker article, What My Musical Instruments Have Taught Me, you describe in detail your appreciation for the tactical experience of playing music. In your opinion, when music is created with or through AI, does this destroy a key quality or aspect of the experience? Does it even matter if it is made with AI if it is already being technologically reproduced? How should we differentiate between music that is composed of electronic instruments by means of the human hand versus music that is produced solely through AI? What do you think is an ideal way for artists to balance the boundaries of human-made art and art made with the help of or solely by algorithms?
Okay. So these are big questions, and I am tasked with giving you a very brief answer to all three.
Well, 5 minutes.
I will do my best. You asked about Schopenhauer and the connection between post-symbolic communication and music. Post-symbolic communication was an idea I talked about a great deal in the time frame of the early 80s. So it's quite a long time ago. The notion of it was that if you had some kind of fluid, really improvisatory, instant way of creating forms through computer algorithms, is there some way that you can have enough flexibility to create what you'd otherwise have to represent, except to do so directly, to sort of bypass representation itself and enter into some kind of new world of directly sharing forms? Now, and then you could argue that improvised music is like that. You're directly sharing forms, except that they're only forms, and they're not, they don't have something. Now, what is it they don't have? Well, you could say, well, they don't have content, maybe. I don't know if that's quite right. They don't have internal continuing structure and dynamics. They're not in themselves organisms or machines. And so there's some way, so at the time we didn't have generative AI, obviously, because this was decades ago. 45 years ago is about when this was happening. It's kind of crazy. But the notion was, so I wasn't thinking in terms of prompt-based generative algorithms, which is what's common now. I wanted to have like virtual musical instruments in a virtual world and have a way of mapping what I played on them to turn into anything else, other instruments or creatures or anything, all kinds of stuff. That's what I wanted, which is a similar idea in a way, but I wanted it to be outside of any particular set of symbols. It was like in just a language of forms into forms into forms into forms. And would that be possible, and what would that mean? So that was the exploration. Whether that idea entirely makes sense is still not clear to me. I'm still fascinated by it, and I still push on it. And there's some days when I think it doesn't quite make sense, and other days when I think it does. More recently, in this era of prompt-based AI, naturally, I've played around with using prompts to make spontaneous virtual world stuff while you're inside. And if anybody's interested in that, my research group has been publishing papers at the various conferences, so you can look them up. And they're called things like Speaking the World into Existence, and there's another one called Social Conjuring, and you can find these papers if you want. Social Conjuring might actually not be out yet. But anyway, there are just the different VR and AI conferences, the usual places. And so you can read about how we do it and what it's like. And it's interesting. It's an amazing experience to be in a virtual world and just ask for things. And other people are also there. And they co-experience spontaneously creating stuff. I feel like that whole thing is turning into gaming more than anything, like Minecraft, where you ask for stuff, and there's been a very strong crossover between the people interested in that, and it's turned into all kinds of stuff in Minecraft and other tools like that. And I have mixed feelings about that, because I always kind of thought the gaming framework was an unnecessary imposition of artificial motivations on top of creativity. My problem with gaming is a little bit like the problem a lot of people have with capitalism, that it seems like do you really need this extra thing? Isn't it just distorting? Like, why not just do good stuff. Like, why do you need that? That's kind of how I feel about. I'm actually more comfortable with capitalism than gaming, as it happens, for various reasons, because capitalism at least does some collective market calculation that can sometimes be of use when it's not failing and screwing us all. But every once in a while, it's actually a good thing. But anyway, so that's post-symbolic communication. All right, then the next question, I need to remember now. You asked about, just, tell me in a couple words. I'm sorry, I forgot.
We'll go one by one after this.
Yeah.
Hello. Hello, sorry about that. It's
No,
a lot of
my
questions.
apologies. I should have remembered it, but I tend to sort of go off on something.
No,
and
that's all
forget.
right. I asked about the changes in streaming service algorithms, the sophistication of them, including the addition of AI, DJ playlists, and how that affects listening.
Okay, right. Okay, so I think, so do you remember I was just saying a second ago that I feel like part of my job is ridiculing AI, and yet here I am working on the algorithms and everything. So I think the algorithms are really useful. Like, I think some of the tools we have now are genuinely useful. I think asking it to talk about me is not useful, really. But I think, like, I'll give you an example of something simple. If you're looking through the literature and you want to find people who've written about a particular topic, different authors might have used different terms to talk about similar ideas. And this is especially true in the technical literature, where in math, a particular mathematical object might have 25 different terms because different groups thought they might have discovered it the first time and didn't even know how to figure out if anybody else ever had. The AI models can often do multiple hops and unify that literature. And that, you might say, well, that's not very glorious. That's not like it coming alive and destroying humanity. That doesn't sound as romantic as all the others. Actually, to me, that's better. That's like a pretty big deal. I love that kind of thing because it's very concrete and very specific. So I'm into that. The idea of AI as a form of collaboration makes all the sense in the world. The idea of AI as a source in itself does not. So as soon as you say that the AI is the source, you've actually also agreed to a bunch of fine print that you might not have thought about. It's like when you sign a contract, like you click through on some website and there are all these paragraphs in the EULA about how from now on we own your skin, and you didn't actually read through everything. And if we become bankrupt, some unknown party will then own your skin, or well, your genes, to use a case that's very real right now. People don't read those things, they just click through. So the very concept of AI is like a EULA you haven't read. And so here, let me tell you some of the paragraphs in the EULA you've clicked on, just by asking that question. So one of the paragraphs says, you agree that works of creativity, such as music or writing, are valued primarily as artifacts that can be evaluated as if they were machines or minerals or something. And so if they come from a different source, it doesn't matter because it's the artifact that matters. You've agreed to that. I think that's philosophically incorrect. I don't accept that. But you've intrinsically agreed to that sensibility because if AI can do the writing or make the music, then it must be that the musical artifact was the whole point, and it doesn't matter where it came from so much, right? But maybe that's not true. Maybe what's really going on is that you and the people who make music or the people who write are part of a family, part of a system, and you share a context and you're creating a context and it's part of this process, and the writing artifact isn't the important thing. Let me go back to the jewelry. A machine I could train an AI to make fake Navajo jewelry in like 35 seconds or less. I mean, that's not a hard problem. I could train it on 10,000 pictures of Navajo jewelry, and then it could spit out some fake Navajo jewelry. It's just a giant interpolation machine. But I grew up in New Mexico. I grew up among makers. This is from my hometown. I know them. I visited the mines where the turquoise is from. And the social history of these things, the way that the Navajo silversmiths took control and created their own economy and their own style and started to exercise economic independence for the first time by doing this is an amazing story. And if you've been in that, you're getting something entirely different than an AI algorithm just spitting out pictures of fake jewelry, right? And so when you look at this, the more context you have, the more you see through it, and the more you become part of it, and the more it becomes an evolving system rather than just the artifact. So I'm going on much too long. So I've only told you about one paragraph you've agreed to in order to ask your question, but it's a bad paragraph. You need to read the EULA really carefully before you click on it. Okay. I'm sorry, remind me did that make sense? Was that clear enough? I hope it was.
Yeah, that made sense. I think my concern was more that I don't agree with that paragraph, and so the influence of AI on music, having accepted that as something that a lot of people
Right.
accept when it's integrated.
Can I tell you another paragraph that you agreed to when you clicked?
I think we might have time for Mary's question now.
Oh,
I
I'm sorry.
fear. I fear.
Okay, because there's another one, but let's see what yours is. Maybe we'll be lucky and it'll be that paragraph. So, so what? Tell me your question again.
Yes. So my question was, in your opinion, when music is created with or through AI, does this destroy a key aspect of the experience? Does it even matter if it is made with AI, if it is already being technologically reproduced? How should we differentiate between music that is composed of electronic instruments by means of the human hand versus music that is produced solely through AI? And what do you think is an ideal way for artists to balance the boundaries of human-made art and art made with the help or solely by algorithms?
Right. Great. So you know what? It actually does overlap with the paragraph I wanted to talk about. So we are incredibly lucky. I'm forcing it only slightly, not really that much. So there's when people use AI to make something, the first thing they want to do is pass the Turing test and say, oh, other people are accepting it as real. We must be achieving something. We're achieving consciousness or something. We're achieving the human brain. I think that's silly because fooling people is not that hard, especially if they kind of want to be fooled. So it's kind of beneath our ambition, as I said in a more recent piece. But then there's this other thing. So in the past, when it was always harder to make music, that made music intrinsically more rare and more expensive to create. And one of the effects of that is any two pieces of music were somewhat distant from each other because it was enough effort to make, like if you're making a piece of, if you want to make a jazz version of an old English country dance song, that would be kind of a cool mashup, but it's some real work to figure it out. And probably nobody else would have done that. But now if you do that in AI, it can come together pretty easily. You can get a dozen different versions of it instantly. But the thing about that is that once it becomes really cheap to make variations and combinations and different permutations of things, all of the different instances don't have so much distance between each other, because distance is always a measure of energy spent to get from one location to another. Right? And so if you start to lose distance, everything starts to become the same. Everything gradually starts to blanch out. And so I think a lot of times when people hear AI created music or read AI created short stories or whatever it is, they're getting this sense that all the different AI versions that might come out are kind of continuous with one another and are losing distance between them and are turning into a big mush. But that means you are too. That means that you're gradually being absorbed into the great mush. You're losing your place. Because you're losing all place. You're losing all distance. Everything's being mushed into one. And so what happens is context and meaning gradually also get lost because there's no longer anything positioned. And so the way out of this is to not focus on music as an artifact at all, but as a process that's fully embodied in every other aspect of the lives of both creators and co-creators and people who perceive and enjoy it and people who participate in it and people who might be patrons of it or people who hate it and criticize it. To focus on the experience rather than the artifact is the way out, because experience is still rare and experience is still positioned and experience is still distinct. And on the other hand, like if somebody wants to do a DJ night with fake AI music and put up some weird lasers and get high and make it a party, I'm not here to judge, okay? Go for it, you know. But just be aware that when you do that, you've clicked through on a EULA that has this paragraph that's probably not in your interest aside from being wrong.
We'll read them in class.
I'm sorry to go on for so long.
That's okay. We're going to have to just be spontaneous. But what? No, no, don't talk. But I'm not going to I'm not going to join the questions. I'll go. Now we'll have a single question. So I'll give you a break, and then I'll just kind of curate as much as I can. Elsie, you have to stand up. Elsie is going to introduce himself.
Hello, my name's Elsie. Really nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
I do need a little bit of context for my question. Oh, needs to turn on. Sorry, is this better?
Yes.
Okay. I do need a little bit of context here. So Neil Postman wrote that technological change is neither additive nor subtractive. It is ecological. One significant change generates total change. As an example, the technology of writing both increased humanity's access to information and encouraged the standardization of that information. We write books, we record facts, we codify laws. So in a post-writing society, everything is different, including the meaning of ideas like art, memory, and truth. So obviously writing is a pretty old technology, but new technologies are also altering the precepts at the core of society. So I kind of wanted to focus on one to begin with. So you are the founding father of virtual reality. You founded VPL Research in 1985. So since you were there—
but whatever.
I'm sorry.
That doesn't matter.
But you also kind of, maybe contrary to expectation, you have this huge emphasis on like physicality, like you talked about with your jewelry. So I kind of want to ask you, since you were there at the beginning, in what ways have you seen society change since you introduced VR technology? Has its existence changed our language, the way we interact with one another, or the way we prioritize physicality and interact with the physical world?
Well, okay, so virtual reality goes through periodic hype cycles where it becomes a really big deal in the culture, and then it kind of fades away, and then it comes back. Its period seems to be maybe, I've estimated at 3.5 years or so. And then every time one comes around, young people are sure that they're encountering it for the first time. And so we say, oh, I've been there from the beginning, because they were at the previous one from a few years ago. And it has become different over the years, because with each new cycle, people actually have access to equipment. And so in the early days, like in the 80s, there were a couple of pretty prominent hype cycles for VR, but it was all hypothetical, because there were very, very few actual working systems in the world, and almost nobody could ever experience them. They were super, super rare. And now everybody has access to cheap ones, the Oculus Quest or whatever. There's like lots of them. And this is a whole other thing where I could do a dissertation on this, and I'm trying to think of what is the very most important thing to say. One thing is the way people use it is a little like what I expected, because I always thought that this was like a cool treat, not like something you'd keep on all the time. And that put me in a minority, because everybody wants the next iPhone in the industry. They want the next platform that everybody's going to have on their head constantly. And I look around the room and I see people using their little phones. I'm looking at you. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I believe you. I believe you. But I don't see anybody with a VR headset on or anything similar, right? So it never turned into that. But I think that that's appropriate, because, like I always said in the past, the coolest moment in VR is when you take the thing off, because I think it gives you a moment to have freshened senses, to compare, to just notice reality anew. And I think that's the greatest gift. Whenever you have a point of comparison, you can appreciate something. And so it gives the miracle of reality a point of comparison. And nothing else about VR is as important as that one thing. That's the very best thing about it. And I still love that about it. So always notice the moment you're taking the thing off. The quality of it has changed vastly. Because of the success, the two commercial models that have been available to try to emulate for people trying to make a business of VR are, well, there's a few. There's the social media one, and there's the gaming one. And then to a lesser degree at certain like festivals, it could be cinema, and there's some other ones. But it's mostly those two. And neither of those really fit VR very gracefully. But what we end up having is, for the gaming one, we tend to have a very visually dominant experience with very kind of push button style interactions to match the gaming controller, because the gaming controller is the essence of what we think of as gaming. But of course, what I really want in virtual reality is very fluid. I want to have as many continuous degrees of freedom and as much fluidity as possible. And VR hasn't developed that way at all. And in fact, it's a little shocking to me how perfunctory and choppy the user experience is in VR from every single source I've seen compared to the early days. Because in the early days, the graphics were so expensive to compute in real time that you were forced to really focus on haptics and interaction and sound, which are the things you could afford to do. So all of those things really had to carry it. And that made it, I think, a kind of a more charming interactive experience. I think the visual dominance is in a way a shame, and has been a false economy for it. So those are some thoughts. I'm glad whenever I see people who still like it. It always makes me happy that people enjoy it. And I do think it's fun. It can be, you know, I think there's very little good content out there because almost everybody who designs for it, like Apple's thing is just an iPod on your, like they have, or an iPad, you know, they haven't really, it's not really a native, hardware-wise, it's a native VR device, but software-wise, it simply isn't. They're just not even touching it. And it's like weird, but that's what happened.
It's good to be able to ask you my question in person. My name's Ashlyn, and I'm a third-year rhetoric major. So while Elsie's question asks you to recall the history of VR, I'm sort of interested in the future, specifically related to writing of perhaps what some people call artificial intelligence. So despite what our professor said at the beginning, that she didn't want her students to see her using ChatGPT, many of my friends use the platform, and you're making money from them using ChatGPT as a search engine or a proofreading device, or to just bounce ideas in a conversational manner. And so I'm watching sort of my friends' writing process change and the way that they think change based off of how they've used this technology throughout college. And this recalls for me what Bernard Stiegler says about technology, mostly his view that technology doesn't just add on to an existing or fixed reality, but sort of like changes the way that we think and interact with the world. And so based on this observation, I'd be curious to hear you talk specifically about LLMs and how they exist in their current form. And perhaps ChatGPT could be an example of that, and how you think that they change our relationship to reality, but also learning and more specifically writing. So my question is, what do you think of the future of writing?
Okay, that's another very well-bounded micro question that can be comprehensively answered in just a few sentences. God, how do I even start? I like that you've brought up scholars who've looked at the history of communication, like Postman and so on. I think that's a very important tradition, and I love these writers, and especially some of the ones who were early on the scene had wonderful insights. If you haven't read Walter Benjamin, please do. And if you haven't, do you know The Machine Stops? Read that. Have they read The Machine Stops? Make them read it. And then
They've read the Benjamin is like bread and butter in the Rhetoric Department.
Yeah. Well, it is. Benjamin, that's right. That would be the pronunciation. So anyway, one thing you can do if you want to think about virtual reality and writing, there's no way to do this fully, but imagine yourself going back hundreds of thousands of years. People have fire. We're hanging out at night around the fire. We might be Neanderthals, maybe we're Homo sapiens, I don't know. We might be one of the others around. And we're telling stories, and the light's flickering, and we might be doing shadows, we might be dancing around, we might be making noises, we might be making noises together. That's the origin. And I like imagining that. Of course, I can't really know what it was like. I've had the good fortune to play a cast of a Neanderthal flute from 75,000 years ago, and it plays in tin. and it guides you, and you can kind of tell a little bit about the kind of music they played. So you can, sometimes the old artifacts can tell you a little bit, or old pictographs or something, but try to get back there, and then you can start to imagine this whole crazy, crazy vector through all the griots and ancient rappers and the early, Homer and the Torah and all the crazy things, and coming forward, and something starts to emerge from that deep historical perspective. I think that's maybe helpful, because once again, like I said before, if you center yourself in the experience and in the shared system of experience with all the other people in the loop instead of in the artifact, you do a lot better. And seeing through to the experience is always the key. It's always the secret, even if you can never do it perfectly, because you're not omniscient, you're limited, and yet you can try for the experience. You can try for it, and you can get closer and closer, even if you never quite get there. So that's the first thing I'd say. But then the thing about writing is that this brings up another paragraph in this EULA that everybody seems to have signed. And that is that you will conceive of yourself in modernity purely as a consumer, where writing will be done for you because you just click, and as a consumer, the writing is provided to you. Maybe instead of a story that's the same for everybody, it'll be customized for you by the AI algorithm. Isn't that better? Everything comes from you. But by the way, that means nobody needs anything from you either. So enjoy your bounty, you worthless thing. And that's what the paragraph says that people have clicked on. It's total bullshit, but it is the paragraph that people have clicked on. So I think when you read something, it doesn't, like the fact that a fake thing, like we've had forgeries forever. There have been fake literary documents forever. This is normal. Fooling people, whether it's done by, however it's done, happens. But do your best. The reason to try to go into context in history is not to authenticate, but it's to deepen, right? So don't get confused about this made-up Turing test drama about, oh, can the large language model fool you? Because it can, because we're all dumb and we can be fooled once in a while. That doesn't mean a thing. And it's the wrong question, and it doesn't do any good for anybody. Nothing's accomplished. If somebody's fooled, unless there's a professional magician getting a buck out of it, nothing's been accomplished. So the right thing to do is to deepen, try to get more and more context, and once again, the purpose is not authentication. The purpose is not to engage in the fake drama of whether you can be fooled or not. The purpose is to enter deeper and deeper and deeper into the cycle of human experience in which any of this even means a thing at all. And if writing can be a beautiful way to do that, because writing's hard. Good writing is really hard. I'm told by some that I've achieved it on occasion. Maybe that is so. But what I can tell you is that to just even avoid bad writing is hard. Let me put it that way. Writing is hard because you really have to learn to think. When you write, you are making yourself vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there and you're committing to this word instead of that word. And in doing that, you're declaring who you are. You're making yourself real. And you are separating yourself from the mush continuum where everything is at the same place as everything else. That is what writing is for. Sure. Hey.
Hi, my name is Izzy, and I'll be starting off a few questions about data dignity and economics.
Okay.
The two tenets of data dignity, which are one, paying people for contribution to AI learning, and two, creating jobs for people within a system that heavily utilizes AI, seem to oppose the reality of the way capitalism functions. Using these ideas, how can we understand the reality of the development of a new creative class post-AI enforcement, and how will this reshape work, life, fulfillment, and provide for those specifically outside of the tech industry? Additionally, How are those of us who are anti-AI supposed to accept its installation by a few people in the tech sphere with these resulting changes? And finally, how does this differ from your critiques of the way social media has been imposed upon us?
Okay, great. There's a lot in there. This is another extremely brief and compact question that can be answered in just a few sentences in totality. And so thank you for giving me that very easy task. So data dignity is a notion of keeping track of the human source of value in a digital system. I've been exploring for a really long time, and if you want to see an earlier version of it, I wrote a book called Who Owns the Future that explores it. Now, sometimes people read it saying, oh my God, we have so much capitalism. How can you want more capitalism? But the point here is in a way to push capitalism to see if you can push it far enough that it transforms into something entirely different. There was going to be, oh God, there was this kind of cool scheme that never got finished. So I had a dear friend named David Graeber who passed away, and we wrote 2 companion books about this. Then we were going to do a third one that's a synthesis. So his book was called The Dawn of Everything, about how in the history of human systems, there have been many more than are generally given credence in our usual, this usual story we tell ourselves. And then I wrote a book that actually came out a year earlier called The Dawn of the New Everything, which was about the origin of all these ideas and technology. And what we're trying to do, Dave's a very left person who initiated the Occupy movement once upon a time and all that. And then, and I'm kind of more of a pragmatist somewhere in between, but at any rate, what we were trying to do is just ask the question, is there a way to use the granularity of digital systems to push what we think of as capitalism into this entirely different state that actually would work better? Because some of the ideals of capitalist thinkers are actually pretty cool if you go into the history. Some of them are dreadful. I mean, you can, you know, I know that there are some stinkers in there, but Keynes is actually kind of a really interesting and cool figure and really worth reading if you haven't. And so the question is there some kind of opportunity to push this into some other level that's actually better? The problem is that when you have very, very low friction systems like you do on a digital network, there's this thing called network effects that starts to dominate. Network effects are the way that their value and power and influence are created solely because of network artifacts rather than anything specific about content or other aspects of what might be going on. So for instance, in social media, if somebody knows a lot of people, they're more likely to know even more people. There's this way that once it gets started, it catapults, and there's a kind of a momentum to it. But even that's neither here nor there. But what is important is that the platforms tend to become hyper-monopolies. And so you tend to have this situation where as the world digitizes, there are a very small number of hypercentral digital hubs where all the wealth and influence and power accumulate. So right now, like if you look at the United States, there's just a handful of people who have as much money as the whole bottom half of the population, and all of them have a digital hub. So it's like this incredible form of wealth concentration that's probably more intense than any other in history, more than railroads or shipping or just, you know, monarchy that has ever been. It's really something. And so that distortion comes out naturally when you have the low friction of the digital world. And so data dignity is saying, well, wait a second. Who said that all the people who were vassals of these central things are the ones who are demonetized and are purely subject to them? What if whatever it is that accumulated at the center was also distributed around to them and the whole thing was less centralized? Is that possible? And so then there's a long history of this idea. And going back about a half century, I had a friend and pseudo roommate named Richard Stallman, who was my opposition at that time, who invented the free software and kind of Creative Commons ideology. And I was saying, you know, the problem with that is that it's like so low friction, it'll just be some new hub that gets everything. And it did turn out to be. There's things like Google got everything and got all the power. Wouldn't it be better to have some kind of really distributed capitalism and then there's a huge social history to this. So the original concept for digital networking that actually was laid out in any specific architecture is due to Ted Nelson, 1960, when he's a Harvard student. And he was doing something very much like what we'd call data dignity now, where there'd be some kind of way that there's a distribution of trickle of royalties. That'll never be perfectly fair. That'll be a bit of a social contract based on rough calculations that would at least get both capital and influence and decision-making power widely distributed instead of being hyper centralized. All right, sorry to go on so much about that, but that's what, and now data dignity actually means other things than you said. These days, it's also a way to try to improve quality and safety in what we call AI, since I don't think AI is a real thing. So right now, maybe that's too much to explain, but if you keep track of the human sources, you can ground the model so that you're not just having the model try to evaluate itself, and then they kind of go a little nuts and hallucinate and stuff. And so if you keep on going back to the original peoples who are sources, you can make them more concretely connected to the world. And so it's actually a better way to do things, I think, anyway. So is data dignity capitalism? It's like a hypothetical new, much more fluid kind of capitalism that is more acknowledging of the reality of how things hyperaccumulate due to network effects and low friction systems. We've never had this problem before. It's a new thing. It's a new economic problem, and so it's a new class of solution to address it. I'm so tired of people saying, "Oh, we're going to democratize this and give access to everybody." It doesn't mean that everybody gets empowered. It means that some central hub is the thing that's going to get hyper empowered, and everybody's going to become a vassal of that hub, because and it's happened again and again and again. Social media. Amazon, I don't know how many examples there needs to be, but there needs to be a countervailing force to the hypercentralization of network effects. And so we need a new economics for that. So that's what data dignity is.
Thank you. You want some water to take a break?
Oh my God!
So it's not true that well, you know, you're a Renaissance
students
man.
are merciless.
So this is your sport. I'm thinking perhaps that Carl and Brooke can ask their questions one after the other, since Jaron just got a break.
Yeah, of course. Hi, I'm Carl. And kind of going back to what you've been talking about, data dignity in the context of generative models these days, where we can really emphasize authorship and provenance, tracing things where they came from. When we're thinking about models today, a lot of evaluation, if you think about it as a monolithic entity, you want to evaluate how well it solves a problem, how well it codes. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts under your framework of data dignity. How can we come up with criteria for what a good model is? How can we evaluate how well it attributes authorship?
Hi. Hi, I'm Brooke. I'm curious about a conception of social media that you've brought up in past interviews, a paid model that would mirror TV subscription services like Netflix, requiring participants to pay to see social media content, and in turn producing content that's good enough to pay for. At baseline, I'm curious to hear you articulate how payment brings us to peak social media. Does the money generated by user payments go to social media creators? How could we distribute it in a way that doesn't mirror existing algorithms and thereby reproduce the features of social media that you take issue with?
Two different questions. There is no functioning large model AI with data dignity qualities yet, but I think there will be one this year. And as soon as we have a concrete example, we can study it, because and the reason it's taken this long is there's a lot of reasons, but at any rate, I think we'll have one, and then we'll be able to publish on it and give people an ability to experiment with it. I believe it'll have the function of being more, it'll explain itself more reliably. What we know is that the explanations used in large models now are often hallucinatory themselves. There's an excellent paper about this from the last 2 weeks put out by a research group at Anthropic that's been getting a lot of play if you haven't seen it. You can search online, you'll find it very easily. And there's a bunch of videos that explain it that are on YouTube and stuff. And then let's see, there's two competing visions of how information systems, including AI, should interface with humanity in the future. One of them is that people don't need to be paid anymore, and because it'll be highly automated, ultra-sharing society, and will leave capitalism behind, and everybody will survive on a sort of a generic largesse, which is often called the universal basic income. And the problem, I have a lot of problems with universal basic income. Almost everybody in Silicon Valley thinks it's the best way forward. It's super common, but as an idea, but the problem with it is that anytime you have a central authority that doles out payments, even if the people are super enlightened and it's super wonderful and it starts off being well designed, it's a temptation for ambitious bad people to take over. So the way I often put this is you start with Bolsheviks, then you get Stalinists, if you get that reference. So having a single centralized router for power benefits and whatever is just it's just too much of a tempting target. And if you look at scholars of decent societies like Hannah Arendt or de Tocqueville or many others, they'll often talk about how a sort of a confusion of societal institutions that avoids a single coherent tower at the center of influence seems to be necessary to avoid this phenomenon of bad people looking at a target and taking it over. Like the presidency as one example, but whatever. Okay, so so what's an alternative though, if we're really going to demonetize everybody? Well, the data dignity idea is based on, in a way, a very profound optimism, and it goes like this. Instead of, it's not make work, it's not artificial, because everybody will say, well, but people, we don't need your creativity. How creative do you expect people to get? Well, I think in the future, there might be an exponentially exploding variety of crazy things that people want to do, for which information systems, perhaps AI, if you like that framing, will be needed. Like maybe in the future, we'll all freely fly around in space without spaceships, and we'll do body mods that give us propulsion, and we'll be, I don't know, like crazy stuff. And all of us will have these hyper detailed bio mod weird things that do bio and DNA modifications to us to allow us to just fly up into space. But then there'll be a whole class of artists who are stuffing the AIs that run those machines with all kinds of ideas and examples of how to do it. But that'll be one of 10,000 and then 100,000 and then 100 million different weird things like that that people do. So it's like a vision of hyper creative expansion into the deep future, a much, much more optimistic and ambitious vision than because the usual vision is we're the smartest generation in all history. We'll just fix everything for all time. So the rest of you are worthless. So you'll be on universal basic income because you'll have nothing to offer. Enjoy it. It's such bullshit. So I prefer, pardon my language, I really prefer this hyper expansion of creativity in the future. And data dignity foresees that, and it shows optimism that we do not know the bounds of what creativity will be desirable in the future yet, nor can we, because future people will actually have creativity too that we can't foresee. So that's that. And then, oh God, sorry, when you asked two at once, I forget. So yours was about data dignity and yours was about
Paid social media.
Paid social media. So a lot of people don't like that because you want your free social media. I just want to point out that your free social media has destroyed your world. That when you see somebody abducted on campus, thanks social media, because what's going on is that it's turned everybody into middle school ninnies and absolutely destroyed discourse for almost everybody and destroyed our politics. It's a horrible, horrible thing, but you get it for free, yay. So what I want, I don't really care if people are paid money or not. All I want is whoever owns the central hub, Mr. Zuck, or Elon, or whoever owns a central media hub, or ByteDance that owns TikTok, I want all of the people on it to get benefits on the same terms as whatever that is. So if those people get money, then everybody else needs to get money. If the whole thing runs on some other system that's not money, fine, but it has to be the same. You can't have the hub get the money and everybody else be demonetized and then say, oh, this is enlightened, because it is the opposite of enlightened. So as long as the hub and the leaves are consistent with one another, I'm fine with it. And since everybody seems to want money in our society, then yeah, you ought to pay and get paid for your social media experience, because that's the only way to decentralize the thing if it runs on money at all. If it runs on money at all for the people who run it, but you want to enjoy this illusion that you're in socialist paradise and getting stuff for free and acting for free or just for attention or something, then what happens is the true customers are the people who are paying to manipulate you. Oh, lucky you. And so then, of course, everything goes horrible in society. And I mean, it's like such a dumb system. Now, what I do want to say is that we have made forays into data dignity in social media since I wrote that book and since I've worked on it. So I was harassing the people at YouTube, not just me, a whole bunch of people, and they started to open up their terms so that we're starting to see the emergence of some YouTubers and some people on other platforms who were able to kind of set their own commercial terms and make a living. So right now, I would say there's a dozen science educators with major YouTube channels who are at a stellar level. Veritasium, Three Blue, One Brown. If any of you follow science on YouTube, you'll be familiar with these. That didn't exist a while ago. Like 10 years ago, we didn't have that. Now we do. And the reason is that they liberalized terms to allow these people to have commercial lives. And all of a sudden, you're seeing higher quality stuff. That doesn't mean I love money as a method. It's just that if there's going to be money in the center, there has to be money at the leaves. That's all I'm saying. If we want to work out some other kind of social media that's popular that doesn't have money in the center, I'm open, but nobody's ever done that. That doesn't exist. Maybe it should, maybe it could. Every time somebody tries it, it can't get enough momentum because the money ones have the network effect. And so the problem with YouTube is not that there isn't really good stuff on it, or TikTok or any of them. I think dance culture on TikTok's great. I mean, I love a lot of stuff on these platforms that are poisoning society and killing us all. A lot of the stuff in it is great. The problem is that the preponderance of it is bad. You might not see the preponderance because you might use it in such a way that you only see the good stuff. And so if you want to see what's really going on, get on one of these systems in such a way that it doesn't know who you are, which takes some work because they work really hard to know who you are. But if you put in the effort, you can really join it as a newbie and it has no idea who you are. Then let it run and recommend, and you'll see the darkness come out. And it's super creepy, and you'll see the destruction of everything right there. But we don't allow ourselves to see that because we live in our own little bubbles in it, and we get it for free. So, yeah, I'm so pissed off at that world. I don't even know how to. I just can't even believe we had a choice of doing. We could have done 17 levels of stupid, and we chose the very most stupid level. Is that Berkeley rhetoric enough for you? Have I gotten there? All right.
Yeah. I think we understand. But I want to, because Brooke was also asking, so you're not as interested, you think that the quality will improve if there is, because I think, wasn't that Brooke also you really wanted to understand that? Is that?
I think to improve the quality on social media, there are a few changes that need to take place, but I'm very much an empiricist, and because these haven't happened, I can't be sure, right? I think, once again, it's not that I love money and I love monetization. I just think there has to be consistency between the hub and the leaves. And right now, the only candidate for that would be money, so therefore money. So that, I'm repeating myself. But then there's this other thing, which is called course graining, and is similar to what I was just talking about with Hannah Arendt, societal institutions. So for this, a reference I'll give you was in the Atlantic magazine, and it's called How to Fix Twitter and All of Social Media. And it's before Elon bought it and turned it into X, of course. And so what it proposes is that one of the issues with social media is that by having people have individual identities, we put too much on them and make them crazy. So what it does is it proposes that people would be incentivized to join into groups or brands or journals or bands or whatever you want to call it, and publish as a coordinating group. The advantages of doing that are as follows. One is you can build an audience without having to be on the hamster wheel every single day, because you can share the task and alternate. And there are even a few people who do this successfully. If you look around, that's been happening a bit. Reason two is that there's this question of how many media items the human brain can browse and kind of map out. And I don't know exactly what that is, but it's in the tens of thousands. And I know that because I'm old enough to have enjoyed old bookstores and record stores that had 50,000 things in them. And I would like browse through them and look at them, and it was great. I just went through a store with 6,000 rings on my way here. We can deal with thousands of things. So right now, let's say of people who do any real posting at all, as opposed to just having an account, there's maybe tens of millions on a big platform these days. If those people banded together into groups that were maybe 100 apiece, and you lose 2 orders of magnitude, so maybe you end up in the hundreds of thousands of them. And for a particular sort of thing, maybe you end up with tens of thousands. And all of a sudden, the number of different things online becomes browsable, because the whole part of the fiction that gives algorithms so much power is that the variety online is so great that giving the central hub the power over your attention is the only way you could ever discover anything. But if people work together in groups and we brought down the overall number of different things, it would become browsable, and you wouldn't have to rely on the algorithm anymore. And it could be like an old bookstore or something. Maybe in virtual reality. I've always imagined that. It could be really great. So that's another reason to do clumping or coarse graining. And then another thing has to do with reputation. Right now, when we're all fighting for individual reputations, everybody goes crazy because they're so vulnerable. And especially I see that in teenagers, where everybody's on the verge of being destroyed all the time. And even in public discourse now, it's all about who can insult who. I guess Navarro and Musk are insulting each other today. And oh, isn't that helpful for our economy being destroyed? It really does a lot of good. And so the thing is, we've entered into this piss contest culture. Now, the thing is, if you have groups, all of a sudden, there's a very interesting transformation. When individuals are competing for reputation and attention, whether you can go bad and get as much attention and reward as if you go good. So if you become the jerk on a reality television show, you can get just as much reward as somebody who becomes the good person on a reality television show, right? Attention and reputation in themselves are absolutely amoral, you know, when isolated from anything else. However, when there's a group, there's something very interesting. If I'm in a band with you and then you do something absolutely despicable, I don't like it because I'm getting dragged down. So there's suddenly a different incentive structure where people might want to help each other not get terrible. So it makes it moral instead of amoral. So that's the main reason to create groups instead of individuals. So I think the web should be made of groups. And you can be a member of multiple groups. They can overlap. The groups can be very different and self-govern according to all kinds of different methods. Some might be interested in money. Some might not be. Some might be democracies internally. Some might not be. Like, I don't even care about that. The point is to not make it a sea of individuals, because the sea of individuals can't stand up to the central hub. Whereas the collection of bands or brands or journals, whatever, can. So so this coarse graining is another thing, and it's an essential component of the idea of data dignity. And there are a few other things too. So it's important not to oversimplify the idea, and it's also important to understand that it's not tested yet. And I very much in my lifetime want to get to the point of being able to test it more and understand which parts of it might work in one way or another and which parts need to be modified. And, you know, like, we have to be pragmatic, empirical, and not ideological in order to enter the network age decently.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sonia. Thank you for talking about social media, and thank you, Brooke, for bringing it up, because I would like to deepen our conversation about social media here. In your book, 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now, You describe social media platforms as operating under the bummer model. For those who are unfamiliar, that TU stands for behaviors of users modified and made into an empire for rent, claiming that users are manipulated for profit through social media's businesses-oriented algorithms. And you argue that this business model prioritizes engagement and profit over user autonomy. However, many young people, especially people like me, use social media as a form of community, a virtual community, especially since many of us grew up on social media, making our friends on social media, or even deepening our connections with other people on social media, especially during the pandemic years. And especially since some social medias, instead of relying on algorithmic feeds, they allow users to use their own to create their own communities, like Reddit, where content is curated democratically through votes rather than being pushed like through engagement algorithms. And so my question here is, do you think that virtual communities like these can potentially avoid the harms that you talk about with the bummer model? Or do you think that virtual communities function with the same structure as social media?
Well, since that book was written, see, this is a process. And as I was saying with YouTube and creators, there are more good creators on YouTube now than there were before. And I think that's in part due to YouTube being harassed by the community of critics into loosening up a little bit. In the same way, some of the people who've tried to start new platforms have created some that are I think, less toxic, and Reddit, Substack, so on. You know, so those things weren't around, or they might have been around in a nascent form. But you know, so I'm actually viewing the existence of some of these things as positive signs in support of the argument I'm making, rather than as negative signs in opposition to it. I think they're actually kind of steps in the direction that are okay. Not okay enough for me to join them. I'm still going to be a hard ass about that. But, you know, like I think you can see a spectrum of horribleness in them. And the ones that are better are the ones like this, that are a little less based on stuffing you with manipulation and a little bit decentralizing decision-making into the community that uses it. And so, great, I like it. I think it has to go a lot further. Now, in terms of this question, I want to make it clear that the book is titled very carefully. I give you 10 arguments, but I don't tell you what to do. And I always tell this, especially when I'm talking to high school kids. High school kids haven't read the book, but they've seen this Netflix documentary that their teachers make them watch called Social Dilemma, that my friends and I made. And I'm always like, if I walk through an airport, there's always high school kids saying, "Hey, my teacher made me watch your stupid video." And I'm like, "I'm sure you did something shitty and you deserved it." And then, but at any rate, this happens every time I'm in an airport. But anyway, let me go back to the Turing test, because the Turing test is our founding tribal myth in tech, right? So the idea is that we're supposed to fool you. You know the Turing test, right? So we're supposed to fool you so that you believe the computer is a person. But in the setup of the Turing test, there's two people and one computer. There's a judge, and then there's a computer and a person, and the computer and the person are each appealing to the judge to say, "Hey, I'm a human, I'm a human." Okay, so the thing is, if the Turing test is passed, the test doesn't tell you whether the computer became elevated. It could be that the person became stupid, right? It wouldn't distinguish those two cases. But since there's two people in one computer, there's a 2/3 chance that the people became stupid. All right. And so as a heuristic, in general, on social media, 1/3 is good and 2/3 is really poisonous and stupid. And I think that that's a pretty good, and 1/3 is not nothing. 1/3 is a pretty big chunk. So I've never said that that third of good stuff doesn't exist. Of course it does. The problem is that there's also the 2/3 of horrible stuff. And if you think that 2/3 of horrible stuff doesn't exist on Reddit or Substack, you know, be aware, okay? And so I think what I would say about the less centralized social media is that it's giving us data points. It's helping us move, but we're certainly not there yet.
So we have about 10 minutes and 3 questions. And I just wanted to let everyone know, including you.
Hi, my name is Zara. I'm really excited to ask this question, especially because you say that you like to ridicule AI, but then you're also a part of
I do it with love.
love
AI
to
needs some
ridicule.
tough love. Yeah.
Yes, and I agree. And so my question is about like the argument that AI should not be seen as an extension of humanity and the declaration that we are not gadgets. Because when reading about artificial companionship in your New Yorker article, Your AI Lover Will Change You, you draw a comparison between AI lovers and geishas to indicate a pre-existing history of objectification, artificiality, and exploitation already found within human-to-human relationships, or more specifically, those with power and those that don't have power. As you use geisha as a shorthand for this history that mirrors our attachment to AI, I think it's also important to note that the geisha is a historically racialized and gendered figure. To what extent do you feel our current language regarding AI is indicative of how the non-human is constructed through racist and sexist thought? And how do we, or even you personally, reconcile with the racist and sexist rhetoric that influences, whether implicitly or explicitly, the production of AI and the way we as humans use it?
Okay. So, one thing I want to say, I want to talk. I love what we could call old media, like the process of writing for the New Yorker and going through editors and fact checkers and everything. I love it. I love the New Yorker. I love being a writer for the New Yorker. That said, it's not perfect. And so with something like this, you end up going through so many versions. And so that paragraph where geishas are brought up was originally like 2 pages and much more subtle. And then it gets crunch and crunch and crunch. And then it's like the day before publication, say, oh, can we just say this? And like, I'm like, oh, and like a lot of times these things are you end up with a little bit of imprecision just in order to get it. So as it happens, that's something I know a little bit about because I'm a Japanese culture freak and I went and studied music in Japan when I was very young, especially the shakuhachi flute and then the gagaku music and then some other Buddhist tradition. I could tell many, many stories about that. But anyway, on one occasion, I got to meet a real geisha who was still functioning and was not a sex worker at all, but was like an incredible level expert, like transcendent master of some musical styles and some dance and also rhetoric, conversation, which of course is in Japanese. So I had to work with a translator, but like the actual geishas, it's not a good example. Like I kind of regret that as an example in that piece, but it's just like the kind of thing that happens under deadline and you're trying to crunch something out there and get the general idea across. But I think that was an unfortunate compression there. In truth, it's a little complicated, although historically a lot of them were sex workers and there was the ones that exist today are sort of maintaining in a way the most exalted aspect of the tradition. That's not to say it's not a good representation of what there really was as a whole in the past. And I probably don't understand it fully, but I understand a little bit about it from having met people in it. Anyway, so I wanted to say all that it is a bit more grounded for me than just a hypothetical thing. All right, having said that, up until a certain day last November, every single AI conference was like, why are our AI so sexist and racist? This is horrible. We've got to fix it. We've got to fix it. And now all of a sudden is, never mind all that. Never mind. Let's just compete with China. And I'm like, So there's definitely been a different, the winds have changed directions in AI emphasis for a lot of people. AI is a big mashup of what it was trained on. What it was trained on is what is digitized that is in the training set that wasn't blocked by some lawyer or something. By the way, I have to tell you something really funny. So everybody's suing everybody in AI right now. I was at a panel with lawyers about AI last week, and somebody had this slide of all the lawsuits, and there's this incredible spider web of how everybody's suing everybody over training data. It was really kind of crazy. But anyway, the Authors Guild is suing OpenAI and Microsoft over what they feel is problematic use of authors' materials in training, right? I'm an executive at Microsoft and I'm on the board of the Authors Guild, so I'm suing myself. So this is what I term capitalist yoga. So you put yourself in this weird posture. And I asked the lawyers on both sides, I appear to be suing myself. Is that okay? We sue ourselves all the time. Like, don't worry about it. Just leave the room if anybody talks about it. And there's a bunch of little technicalities where you're sort of suing yourself, but not really quite. Don't worry, it's fine. And so anyway, so I think the answer, the only reason I'm mentioning that is everybody's trying to figure this out, and it's happened really fast. I think the very idea of AI, as I was talking about that EULA before and all those paragraphs that people click through in order to accept the idea, there's a whole set of ideas that I really reject. One in particular that really bugs me is this idea of the single oracle, that there's like this one source. And even if that one source is trained on a lot of things, it might have a lot of variability in it, it still has the same problem as the Wikipedia of being like this idea that there's this one truth for some topics, or this one way of exploring the truth that's preferred. That in itself is going to overlap with a lot of the traditional concerns about power imbalance, and it does so intrinsically, right? So this gets back to data dignity for me, because what I'd like to be able to do is I don't mind using a large language model for things. Like I love using them for research. I really do, because they're just good. You know, they just can really go through a ton of material and find all the related material and organize it in a nice presentation. It's fabulous. If you haven't tried deep research or one of the similar things, like I think it's really, but what I want is I don't want it to just give a, oh, here's this magical answer. What instead I want it to say is, as it's writing it out, I'd like to see the second and third choices for each next word that the large language model should have used. So I see a context of the bigger picture it's navigating rather than just the one thing. And I want to see a list of the 12 most indispensable documents that influenced each paragraph of it, so I can see what the fuck it's referencing. Right, I want to get some context here. Like, is this Joe Hoodwink's Fox Media panel, or is this the Mayo Clinic, or what's going on here? Now, to be fair, there is some of this stuff, and there are examples of the industry starting to do some of this, very much like with social media. Like, these critiques have been around and people are responsive to them, but it should be core. It should be just core, because I mean, you need the context. Without that, the lack of context is intrinsically a power imbalance. It is, by definition, precisely a power imbalance, because this thing is telling you what's what, and you don't know why. Guess who has the power in that situation, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I hope that's a helpful answer.
And to end, I think we have both questions at the same time. No, go ahead, Margaret.
I'll try not to forget the other question.
No, I think you'll be able to.
Okay.
I think you'll be able to do this.
Hi, Jaron. My name's Riley.
Hey.
Nice to meet you. Thanks
Good
for
to
letting
meet
me
you.
pick your brain. The very first point you lay out in your book, 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Right Now, is that we're losing our free will. And I think we can see evidence of this everywhere. I went home over spring break, and my stepsister had her phone taken away. I'm sure it was a really interesting story, but I'm not sure why she'd had it taken away. And after a few hours in her room, she came out, sat down at the TV, and didn't turn on a movie, didn't turn on a TV show, but turned on YouTube Shorts on the TV. Lost about 2/3 of the viewing window because it's vertical and the TV is horizontal. And I think it's fair to say that short form content is addictive, especially given that companies are algorithmically changing our behavior. It's worse for the younger generations who've been exposed to these addictive products since they could hold their heads up. So as companies continue to push and profit off of the addictiveness of their products, and as it becomes harder and harder for users to quit, my question for you is simply, what can we do?
Hi, I'm
Hey.
Margaret. I teach Writing Robots, an Art of Writing sponsored seminar here on campus, where we think about, many of the students are here today, and we think about how we represent machines that write, and how we write with, for, sometimes even against them. I also teach engineers here on campus, and I work a lot with Masters in Engineering students who are learning how to write for popular audiences. And because of that, we are very much in your debt. You have been an example for me and for my students for many years. Thank you.
Oh, that's so kind of you.
But I have to say that when I read your latest piece in The New Yorker, Your AI Lover Will Change You, I responded to it most viscerally, not as an educator, but as a parent of young children. And I wondered not so much about their future AI lovers, which I can't begin to contemplate right now, but instead about what's been proposed by technologists quite recently and with got a lot of enthusiasm, which is AI tutors. AI tutors are coming for us all. They're going to level the playing field. They're going to enable differentiated learning. And they're going to make learning cheaper and faster and more effective and frictionless. And that all sounds sometimes great. I also think a lot about the power imbalance that's built in there, but which you were just referring to. And I think a lot about the way in which education and care for me are fundamentally intertwined. I think in some ways, my daughter, who was 5 at the time, said it better than I did. We were up at Lawrence Hall of Science, and the Alison Gopnik lab was up there. And they were running experiments on kids with ChatGPT. Every once in a while, eager Bay Area parents get their kids experimented on by the Gopnik lab, which is always interesting at a minimum. And they asked my daughter if a machine could write, what questions she would have for it, especially if it could write her stories. And she thought about it for a minute. And she said, "Do you give hugs?" And I think that sums it up much better than I can, but let me try. If we're having machines that are using language, which is just fundamentally bound up in affect and trust and care, participate in knowledge creation and participate perhaps in pedagogy, how do you write that next New Yorker piece? How do you write Your AI Tutor Will Change You?
Okay, so in a way, I was trying to use that piece about AI lovers as a way to also talk a little bit about AI therapists and indirectly about AI tutors. And once again, there's a fallacy of treating people like the student in the case of the AI tutor as a technology rather than as a person. And now a lot of the people doing AI tutors are cool people, you know, like the Khan Academy people or whatever. There's some examples, like there's examples of high school kids looking in the technical literature and saying, can you summarize this fancy paper so I can read it, and getting something out that's maybe not perfectly reliable or accurate, but is actually better than what there would have been before. But the problem is that when you're first on the cusp of bringing these things in, sometimes you see examples like that, but when they're normalized, you might end up with a normal situation that actually has a kind of a pathetic quality to it, because the normalized version of it is much lazier and rote than the sort of example you might first encounter when you're on the threshold of the change, which might be fresher and make more sense. The tutor situation, there's two that are morally complicated. Some of them are not morally complicated, at least to me. The AI lover thing is horrible. I really dislike it. Now, I have many people who disagree. I really want to say, like, one of my best friends, David Eagleman from Stanford, it quoted in the piece, and he's all in it. He's thinking, like, this is great. AI lovers, wonderful idea. Help, you know, and if you want to know his position, I think it's represented pretty well in the New Yorker piece. But I think it's awful. But the two that I find morally complicated are the tutor example and then the sort of medic example. And the reason is that it really is true that even though we should have an economical path to bring a ton of human tutors to various people around the world, we haven't gotten that path. And I think it's reprehensible that we don't, but we don't. You know, like I think we could train lots and lots of teachers and tutors and have them all over the world. And I think that would be a really good thing, but we don't. And I don't think we will. We're shutting down USAID, you know, like we're shutting down the Peace Corps. It's just, I want to believe we could do that, but I've never seen anybody from anywhere else in the world do it either. It's just not happening. So if you could have an AI thing that can diagnose your illness, and it might not be perfect, but it's just way better than what there would otherwise be. And if you have an AI thing that is a tutor for your kid that is not perfect and reliable, but is way better than what there otherwise would be, it's kind of hard to be a purist and say, oh, but it's anti-human and it's absurd and it's got all this hidden messaging in it that's terrible and everything, because the benefits are concrete in that case. Those are two examples. Another one for me is a self-driving car. My mom died in a car accident, and they're just after surviving a concentration camp, you know, and we're terrible drivers. We're killing ourselves and each other in cars all the time. Like that's also, no, I don't want to see all the drivers out of work, but on the other hand, the damage is so great and the potential to remove that damage is so great. So some of these are not, in some of these cases, the benefits are real enough that I'm willing to swallow my ideals and say, okay, so we'll degrade humanity somewhat, but on the other hand, we're getting humanity this benefit. And I'm ready to see compromise in some of those cases. You know, I don't find it easy. And I think the right compromise will be complex. I suspect that wealthy parents in Silicon Valley are not going to let their kids use these tutors that much because they'll know, we know the scam, we know the game, you know? And I think the tutors, both the tutors and the AI lovers and the AI diagnosticians and possibly the AI drivers are all going to be corrupted by incentives before too long. So I don't think you're going to get a politically, morally, or culturally neutral education from your tutor. I think it's going to be influenced by power differentials. I don't think you're going to get a lover who's willing to let you vote for a candidate who's different than the preferred one if whoever runs the service. I had that New Yorker piece originally started out where I had a really funny, I talked to Spike Jonze, who wrote Her, the movie Her, and directed it. And I was like, okay, we're not going to talk about Her, the AI. I want to look at the company that sells Her in the movie and what their motivation is. What's the founder like? What happened? And because obviously these things are going to go bad, you know, like incentives happen, corruption happens, people give in. That's just how we are. Even if we don't want to, we're too lazy to keep our ideals up, or we just get tired, you know. So your lover is going to advocate for certain politics. Your lover is going to advocate for certain commercial behavior. God knows what. Like your AI lover is going to change you in a directed way, not just, you know, intrinsically. So there's all of these problems with the idea. However, those are some of the scenarios with concrete value too. So this whole AI thing is morally complex, and we have hit the heart of the complexity right there. And I often, I'm a member of this panel on the AAAS where we're the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And then there's another one. All of these highfalutin organizations are putting out these recommendations. Like We the Experts are saying that the AI should be directed not to do this and not to do that. It should respect your privacy. It should, but we have no authority. Come on. What's actually going to happen is it's going to be some asshole tech bro who wins the platform war, and it's going to be whatever it is, and it's going to be the luck of the draw how creepy that person is. And because that's how network effect battles happen. They're unpredictable. You don't know which startup will blow up, so you invest in a few of them, then one of them blows up. So network effects have a fundamentally chaotic and unpredictable early phase, and that'll happen with this too. So, this one, sometimes lately, I just kind of moan. Like, sometimes the best I can do is just kind of moan. And this is one of those questions where I feel like what I can do is moan. I hope that's of some use to you.
How about Riley's question about would you moan at what can be done?
What can we do is your question.
About what his sister is going to become?
So with your sister, I have, this is another one I found torturous in my personal life because I don't want to be in the role of being the moralist going and telling people what to do. I want to respect people and say, I'd like you to become more aware of your choices. But on the other hand, when you're dealing with addiction cycles, all of us, I don't put myself above this, all of us lose some choice. All of us lose some ability to make choices, and all of us get suckered once in a while. And I've seen there's a particular peril, it seems, for teenage girls on social media. I've seen it a lot. I have a few friends who study it. Sherry Turkle is a very good person to read on this if you want to find a single source. It's this tragedy sometimes. So some people, like I was saying, it's a 2/3, 1/3 rule. There's 1/3 is great. So there's 1/3 of the time people engage with these things and it's great. They find a great community and they help build their career and it all makes sense. 2/3 of the time, I think there's a problem. And people start to develop self-esteem issues, or they start to just get obsessed with some stupid little rivulet within the social media framework that doesn't really help them and is really for someone else's benefit. And so then the question is, what do you do when you see it going bad? It's a little bit like if a friend is drinking a bit, and I've been in this, you've probably been in this, we've all been in this, like somebody's drinking or using something or whatever, and you're like, I got to talk to you about this. But then on the other hand, they're like, well, it's not your business. And they're right. They're right. And so it's I think, was it Balzac who said to be married, you have to be a genius? Is that a correct quote? Something like that. I don't remember exactly, but there's some famous quote in literature that someone in this room can get right. That to be married, you have to be a genius. Like it's not like you actually have to approach it as if you're going to reconcile general relativity in the standard model. Like you have like some crazy hard thing. And I think that's what it's like when you're dealing with real people, and especially like adolescents, teenagers, and young adults. You have to just hope you're a genius enough to try to think of the right thing to say to help them through. And you just have to kind of keep on working on it, and you're not going to succeed all the time. So I hope that's not like too dark an answer, but I think it's a realistic one, and it shouldn't be dark because sometimes it does work. Sometimes you can be a genius or at least lucky.
Thank you so much.